Um, okay. So the topic of the discussion that we're about to have today is something that we often find ourselves discussing within the team of Wir Machen Das. Our organization, Wir Machen Das, works at the intersection of culture, literature, the arts, and the migration discourse. The aim of one of our most important projects, Weiter Schreiben, is to promote authors in exile, support them as much as possible, and not least because we believe in the diversity and plurality of the arts. And actually the artistic director and founder of the project, as well as of our organization, is here with us today, Annika Reich. Hi, Annika. So you could also ask Annika questions later if you have concrete questions about the project. And my work colleague, Dima Al-Bitar Kalaji, who's also here with us today. She's the editor of the project. She's going to be talking in a minute more about the project and giving us a small input that will also help us frame this discussion. So just to introduce the topic a bit more thoroughly. So as a nonprofit that believes there is a case that can and that should be made for supporting artists in exile, for them deserving platforms, deserving attention, deserving networks, we find ourselves sometimes in this conundrum of having to label certain authors as authors in exile in order to try to attain the goal of inclusion in the German cultural scene. So while the goal is always a transcendence of these labels and categories and an immersion of authors in the German literary world as just authors, the step of labeling seems to be an inevitable one. And so as cultural practitioners who are interested in inclusion and social justice, we ask ourselves, is there a way out? Or is this just a dilemma, so to speak, and something that we'll have to accept and live with? So we're hoping to find some answers to this question in today's discussion, but also we want to address the broader picture, such as what are the conditions under which artists in exile work today? How is their art shaped by their experience of being in exile? And how is the reception of their art shaped by it? And we're really happy to have here with us two guest speakers today, Ghayath Almadhoun and Farah Barqawi. Farah Barqawi is a writer, performer, podcast producer, and podcast host, as well as feminist activist. She has lived in Damascus, Beirut, Chicago, Cairo, and now Berlin. Farah received the Jean-Jacques Rousseau Fellowship at the Schloss Solitude in 2020 and has been a fellow of the Martin Roth Initiative and Wir Machen Das since late 2020. Among her most well-known projects are the feminist projects that she co-founded, Wikigender and the Uprising of Women in the Arab World. Farah, we're so happy to have you here. Ghayath Almadhoun is a poet. Ghayath Almadhoun is a poet who has lived in Syria, Sweden, and now since 2018 in Berlin. He has published 4 collections of poetry, the latest Adrenaline, in Milano in 2017. His work has been translated into several languages, and he has received the DAAD Artists in Berlin Program Scholarship in 2019. In 2018, a selection of his poems were translated into German by Larissa Benda and had the title Ein Raubtier namens Mittelmeer. Ghayath, it's a pleasure to have you with us. So now, before we start our discussion, my work colleague Dima, who's a writer herself and a podcast producer, a podcast host, and an editor in our literary projects, will give us a short input that might help us better understand why and how this phenomenon of labeling plays out in a very practical way. Afterwards, I'll chat with our 2 guests a bit, and then we'll open it up. But please feel free to just write down your questions at any point already during the first part in the chat. I'll do my best to include the questions already in the conversation. And if I cannot manage to do that, then we'll definitely get to them later in the open discussion. So Dima, now the floor is yours.
Thank you, Caroline, and thank you for writing the future. In Weiter Schreiben, writing on, we translate and publish the literary texts of authors living in exile in Germany. We create tandems between German-speaking authors and authors who have arrived in the last years to Germany and organize literary performances, do PR work, and foster a network of solidarity between different authors and artists in our network. Since 2017, when the project was established, the text we received changed a lot over time. Even though the project never pushed for any topics to be covered in the text, there was recurring images of war at the beginning in many of the texts, which was, of course, was very understandable since that was part of the experience many authors had gone through. Slowly, more themes started to emerge, some of them related to the new life and place and some not. War and displacement are still there, but not with the same momentum or the same expressions and language. Over time, the reactions to the project and the authors has also changed. Though the overall reception was always positive, there were some patterns of stigmatization every now and then. A few months ago, we published a beautiful short story about displacement, The First Exodus, written by Abdullah Qasir. Our press officer offered it to a newspaper, and the editor replied that the theme is not hot. The words that the editor has chosen are very remarkable. The literary value of the text was not really considered, and it wasn't rejected for any reason other than it's not a hot theme. I mean, the theme is hot for the author and the people who win it, but anyway, this sentence summarizes a dilemma these authors face, how they and the topics they are interested in and their text might be received. And I think all of us here, as Caroline said, we are here today to think with you and talk if it's possible to break this label and how. Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you, Dima, for this input. And Ghayath, I'll ask you the first question. Do you sometimes encounter this reaction? Do you sometimes get told this topic is not hot enough? And how is that tied to the experience of exile?
Yes, thank you first for the introduction, because you really touched the wound immediately, as I say it. As a writer, I began with speaking about myself from inner to outside. As a writer, I see myself a writer. And I'm not responsible of how the others see you in this subject, but it's really affected. The question is, for example, began when I find that people describe my poetry as a political poetry. And immediately I respond and I say, no, my poetry is not political. This is my life. But then it became like more tension and like I need to fight more. And it was described in the newspaper, in the television, in the evenings where I go like this political poetry. And I continued saying for them, excuse me, but I really don't write political poetry. This is my life. Poetry is a reflection of our memories, our experience, the things we live. And I only reflect in my literature the things that happen around me, exactly like my colleagues in Sweden. They reflect the darkness of the weather in Sweden, the cold weather, the sadness in the winter. So everyone reflects. And when my life became in a different shape, my poetry will be a different shape. Of course, I'm not against the political or to category one in a political poetry section, but I am not. So from the beginning, I felt there is something wrong. And in that time, I'm speaking about between 2008 and 2011. So it's before the Syrian revolution. As I am a Palestinian from Syria, yes, I ran away from the dictatorship. So from that moment, I understand that it's so difficult because the way the Western civilization built in so center, it became like a lighted room. When you have a lot of light from philosophy and knowledge and music and literature and all these great things happen in this Western world in the last 500 years, it is so light, so it's so difficult to look outside the window in the night and see things under less spotlight. So it became so difficult to the level that the light is so strong that even if you try to look from the window, actually you see the reflection of your image on the window, and it's so difficult to see the others or to understand them. So it became very problematic for me. And I understand with the time that there is no bad intention in it. So they are not doing this because they are bad or they try to categorize you, but because they try to be good and to try to be helpful for the people who arrive from crisis. And then I noticed that in Sweden, for example, in the country where I pay my tax, it began in the 70s when the people came from Chile after Pinochet, and then Iran after the Islamic Revolution, and then you go on with the Somalia and Kosovo, and then the Iraqi, and you know, the Palestinians, they were arriving all the time, and ended with the Syrian. And I saw every wave came to Sweden. It was the same. There is nothing you can do. There is no way to solve this problem. People always will try to be good. They will try to label you, to categorize you, even if they didn't mean it. And you will find yourself in this situation. And the best way is to continue your writing and like separate yourself from this question.
Okay, Farah, we'll come to you in a second because I'm very interested in your viewpoint on this. But I just have one follow-up question, Ghayath. So I've read a lot of your interviews and you always insist that, no, your poetry is not political. Yeah. It just is a reflection of your life and your experience. But would you say that maybe some individuals are just more politicized than others, and individuals who live in exile or artists in exile just happen to be more politicized than others, that it's not just the perception of it as more political, but your experience is just also more political?
Yeah, it's a really important question because it has many levels. Like I can go deep in the subject of exile because the exile itself, it's very important for literature as a scene. Like if you take it as a scene, like it gives you the opportunity to be in, when you are in exile, to see the world from different angle. As an artist or a writer, you could be, you play the role of the outsider. And this is, by doing that, you find yourself in the parallel. And when you are in the parallel, things began to be very important for literature. Because in the parallel, you became, in a way, a foggy personality. So, for example, I am a not Syrian writer anymore. I left Syria 12 years ago. There is no way. And I will never be a Swedish writer or German or European. I will not be accepted even. I'm writing in Arabic. So I find myself in this situation where I can play the role of outsider, the witness. Exactly like when the people, four people play card. Everyone could see his cards. And I am the outsider who looking to the four people, I'm not playing, and I can see every card and I can move. But the problem that I'm not playing, if you understand me. So this role could in the creativity, it is really, really important. And the Western world was having a lot of this, you know, before the First and the Second War and dictatorship in Europe and like this, it exists a lot. So the exile was part of the Western literature. The problem happened after the Second War ended. And then there is no dictatorship anymore in Europe, there is no wars, and the writers find themselves in this situation. There is no exile anymore. And because that, the Western created what we call scholarship and residency and exchange between writers to fill the emptiness of this exile thing. Because if you think about Bertolt Brecht running away from SS, or Hannah Arendt, I give two examples from Germany, or in my case, the Palestinian Edward Said running away to the United States from the occupation, or like this. This is not possible anymore for the Western people. So they began to find another way because they understand the importance of the exile. But in the same time, to be in the exile in the Western world, and you are from the third world, or you came from the dictatorship, it tried to, as you take the fat from the milk, they try to take, without intention, they try to take the right of critique from you. You should, like, for example, I don't know how this happened, but it looked like have a long history of colonialism, that you should be grateful. You should integrate and be grateful. And it's began in the normal life that you're not allowed to make critique, but then it goes to literature. And for example, if you think in a simple way, who is the people who were not allowed to make critique during the history? Like the slaves under the slavery, people under occupation, the Jewish under the Nazi, the women under patriarchy, and now the immigrant in the Western. Like in the moment you make any critique, they say, go back to your land. For me, this is a political question, but then it's go to the literature. And then you find yourself that you are not able, as a writer, as an Arabic writer, to give your own opinion about something happened in the Arabic literature. I will give you example how you can connect the patriarchy question to, and the cliches known about us to literature. Once in 2012, I was asked about Arabic poet. She's translated in a European language, and she was successful. And they told me, what do you think about her? And then I say, she's a really horrible writer. She's a very bad writer. And immediately they say, like, do you say that because she's a female? Of course not. Like most of the greatest poets I like, they are female. But I say that because you asked me about my opinion. She is a horrible writer. And I have the right to be honest when it's come to this. I'm a feminist person, but I have the right to say that she is a bad writer, exactly like anyone could do it. And you could take these cliches of critique to anything. So from that moment, I understand that the category, it's not only by labeling you to be a writer of the war or the political writer, or putting you with other writer from your background without putting you with other writer from the Western, or they ask the Western writer about his way of writing and how he built the metaphor, and then switch to you and how ask you about your trip, how it was difficult to arrive here and how you find it here. So they didn't ask you about literature. From that moment, I understand that there is no way to fix this problem. I really give up a long time ago.
Okay, wow. Yeah, that was intensive first part. Farah, now I'm interested in hearing, you haven't been living here for a lot of time. You've only been here for some months, but before that, you've also lived in Egypt. How has been your experience here so far? Do you have a different viewpoint on this, or do you share a lot of the experiences? But also, did you face this issue in labeling also in Egypt, or was the shared language perhaps a factor that eased out some of these mechanisms, or did you perhaps face a different kind of labeling in Egypt?
Can you see me well? Because sun in Berlin. Yeah. So Ghayath touched on so many points. I don't know where to start from. Let me say that yeah, definitely being here for shorter time period didn't enable me to experience everything yet in the art scene or in how to be perceived even as a writer. Also, given COVID-19, it was even more and more isolated. However, definitely there is, for me, an extra layer. I spent most of the last 8 years in Cairo, for sure, until I arrived here, and I was always the non-Egyptian in my circles of friends, of artists, and also the Palestinian who is waiting for Ma'bar Rafah to open, and it never does. So it was definitely, as Ghayath mentioned it, exile is a genre, and we are we find ourselves in it and embodying it, whether we want it or not. There is this arriving here in such intensive time. Maybe the way to arrive was also full of me labeling myself, or me thinking of myself also as someone in exile, and that how can I survive, and how can I show up as an artist if I am one in huge numbers of people who are migrants. And there is one thing that enables me to, my gender, my practice, my. So it's kind of problematic, and at the same time enabling this categorization that you find yourself in. And the layer I mentioned is me also being a woman and being a feminist activist. So there is always this tension between who am I and why am I accepted, and this quota things in some applications, and being featured as am I Farah for my writing, or am I here for my suffering, or am I here for what exactly, or for the conditions? So the questions in my head are arising still, I think. How should I position myself in this new country that sees me sometimes as this woman who did the uprising of women in the Arab world? Yes, let's liberate the women in the Arab world, and they're completely getting the message wrong. Or also seeing me as Farah, the Palestinian who is unable to go back home, or Farah who writes and just who wants to live and just have a normal living. I don't know what is normal anymore, but in that sense, yes, I agree with Ghayath, but I haven't reached all of the conclusions he did, honestly, because I haven't been yet here for.
I hope you will have different experience. Maybe people became more professional now, and you will not pass the same. I wish you good luck.
I mean, yeah, but maybe one thing. To be honest, let me also touch on something you mentioned. Like, I disagree with you and agree at the same time, because I am a feminist, and being a feminist to me is political. And I sometimes, when I write my biography, I am not sure if I should say a feminist writer, poet, activist, performer, or a writer, poet, and a feminist activist, which is sometimes, to me, is the question. Like, if I said feminist writer, will everyone expect me to write papers on feminist theory? Or will they only categorize my poetry as feminist and remove all the other aspects from it?
Yeah, actually, what you say is very, very important, because it saves the right to choose. And this is this is one of the reasons that I refuse to live in a dictatorship, to have the right to choose. You choose that what you want. You want to be first a feminist or to be the writer, and I have the same right. And this is very important, that nobody can choose for us what we choose. And I really respect it for you. I am a feminist, but not like in a professional way. I do my best to be a feminist after I grew up in a very masculine, macho society, and it worked hard, and I didn't got it for granted to be a feminist because nobody learned me in school to be a feminist and like this, and I decided to be that. But that is my life, that is something else. When it's about my writing, I decided to be a poet, and I have the right to do that, and you have the right to do what you want without anyone push you outside your choice.
Okay, so we just have now one question already that I think fits very well at this point from P.M.G. Verstraete, I think, right? I think you're asking about this point of the right to critique and the labeling of the poetry as political. Could you perhaps just jump in and elaborate on that question?
Oh, yeah, my name is Peter. Sorry about the initials. Yeah, I mean, it's maybe a question to all three, because I can imagine that these experiences are very different for everybody in different situations. The reason why I'm asking this is I'm also trying to get a grip on how people in exile, and my wife also is in exile here in Germany, so I'm living with it, but you know, how to differentiate between what you feel as a subjectivity, and we talked about feminism, like a feminist subjectivity is a political one, and an identity that is usually also, you know, coming from outside. And maybe we can also go in the third direction, which is positionality. I mean, what kind of positions do you allow through your work to you know, transpire? But when it comes to the right to, you know, make that position, you know, I'm actually interested to hear about the experiences, you know, when you feel that it's being threatened or it's being taken away from you. That's what I understood from Ghayath's you know, contribution. So whatever you want to say to this, I would be very interested to hear.
You want to speak first, Farah?
Ghayath, take a go at this.
Thank you, Farah. Peter, yes? Listen to me, the question is, it's not very, very simple. Like, I always try to give the exile a beautiful meaning so I can survive. But did you read the article of Hannah Arendt, We Refugees? Yes. So she tried to describe the Jewish refugees in New York, that how all of them, they don't want to be refugees, and they change everything to become immigrant. And they say, we are immigrant. Okay. I'm a Swedish citizen from a long time ago now. So I'm not refugee anymore. But it's not like that. The question is not here. I born as a refugee, as a Palestinian refugee in a Palestinian refugee camp in Damascus. It's not about what kind of passport you have or even how you see yourself. It's have very long history of colonialism and political things and like this. But the simple thing for me is to be able to focus on your writing and not pay all your life. You continue paying for political things happen in your country, for example. Like, I can't label the German for forever because of what happened before 1945. Like, there were a village in Syria, there were 700 Syrian and 3,500 Polish people from Poland in one village. So they were like 7 or 6 times more than the Syrian people. There were 60,000 people from Poland in Iran as refugees. We never label the people from Poland with this question. We never take a post from Facebook and from a German person, he's not a writer, and we publish them in Syria. We never take a mediocres who didn't ever publish in Arabic, and we ask them because we want to fill our category, please, could you write something? And then they write, and they didn't publish what they write in Arabic, but we publish them in Germany. And there's hundreds of writers in the Arabic country. Nobody even took a look to them. Hundreds of the writers in Europe, they never be like, I don't know how they became writers. They have very bad quality, mediocre, and actually their books even not published in Arabic. To be a writer, first you write to your own to the people who could read your language, and the translation became as later on as a bonus. I know here in Germany, I met some people who never publish in Arabic, and they have books here, they are famous. And when I read their text in Arabic, it's horrible, actually. I don't know how they cut this. Like, once I remember in Sweden, a lady called me and she asked me if she wants a gay writer. Like, with all respect, I'm a political correct, but like, you can't put us in this category. I will make evening, we need a homosexual writer, and a woman, she take the hijab and a writer. It's not like that. You should do this with your writers. I will not accept to be part of this. To be a political correct is something totally different than being what they do with writers. I saw it's shameful sometimes. I'm sorry to say this. But it's very important to understand that writer is a writer and language is a language. And you can't take anything and publish it and say, this is a writer, she have, I don't know what, suffering before, and now we publish her in Europe. Yes, if she's a writer and she have a quality in writing, or her story is very special, you could give it to another writer who could write it and edit it. But what's going on in some NGOs and some organization, it's really heavy, and we are seeing this every day. And if you see my email, the invitation I got, and I say sorry, like, it's a lot.
Okay, I think this point is clear now. I hope, Peter, this answered your question. Noha, I saw your question. We'll get to that in a minute. I just want us to move past this idea for a minute, and I want to ask Farah something about the universality of this experience of exile. Is there such a thing? I mean, for Ghayath, he was saying at the beginning, there is something about the experience of an artist in exile that they're from the outside. They have an outside view. Do you think are there more characteristics that you would say are very important for this experience as an artist in exile? Or would you say, no, it's much more individual than that?
Yeah, it could be different.
No, thank you, Ghayath. This was a question to Farah, but in a minute, of course, you'll also be able to answer.
Can you see me, or should I do something about this?
We can
I don't know. I mean,
we can totally see you. Don't worry.
Well. Definitely, there is an individual sense to every experience. I mean, everyone also acts according to their previous experiences to exile. It's not only the exile. So we look at the exile as a current moment or an ongoing new present, but there is the past, and everyone has their own past that led them here, and the reasons are different, and the components of their personality and how they can begin anew in a new place differs according to that. Some people switch completely their genre even of art. Some people switch their careers. Some people have to do completely different works to survive. I mean, as Ghayath said, how can I remain as a writer and only a writer, or can I afford even continuing only as a writer? And is it only a question, to me, is it only a question of bad writing versus also having to survive and being labeled as a writer is the only thing that can get you some money? So you start writing 3 articles per week or 4 articles per week for some people, and having to only earn your money this way. So you start even writing even badly, worse than your usual writing. So there is that, but definitely, yes, there is this, I like how Ghayath described it, very poetic, of course, like this foggy presence that makes you here and there at the same time, and up and below, and to me, yes, I remember my latest article I published it in Al-Jumhuriyya. I was I was writing about my first 10 years of my life in Damascus. And at that point, I wrote about my different identities that I call myself. And then I have an Egyptian friend, I didn't mention Egypt. And then Egyptian friend texted me saying she read the article, and you're Egyptian too, by the way. And this is something I never considered until I became in Germany. When I became in Germany, my Egyptian friends started saying, how did you leave? You were part of us. But as long as I was in Egypt, I was always asked, why am I still in Cairo, given the political situation? How can I, being Palestinian, choose Cairo as a place to, if I want to be flourish or anything, how can I choose this place to be in, especially as a woman? And it's funny because it's like, there are individual reasons, as I said, to every choice, including me now. Yes, I am partially in exile, but it's also sometimes exile is not that kind of exile that you have to leave now, but it's also how can I, if you can't survive anymore in where you live, and you choose it, and then you have to commodify yourself as an exiled person to be fastly integrated, because otherwise you will be no one. And this is a question on my mind all of the time, plus the gender, of course, aspect that I will always mention. I agree with Ghayath, this like, give me this, we were looking for only a woman writer or this kind of experience and that kind of experience. And we are layers of experiences. Even a veiled woman yesterday could be unveiled today, and you have no clue what kind of things she went through. And you can't just ask for a veiled woman now to get the cream from that kind of fat. You need the complexity of a person, and you have to deal with what you get, basically, like any person. So.
Ghayath, would you like to add something to that?
Yes, first, I like your, Farah, I really liked, I remember I read your article at Al-Jumhuriyya, the one where you speak with your mother through this, Yeah, and you see how your mother, she was speaking about the past, and you could see all the Palestinian history in the last 40 years. And she say it without explain, like, she say the things for you without describe everything, if you understand me. So she say, when we went outside Lebanon, so you know it's because of the war in 1982, for example. But so she didn't need to describe. This is what happened in most of the literature in the exile. So the people, because they switch their life, even if their audience is still in another country. Let's take example, the Persian writers who were arrived first, long time, 1979. They continue writing in Persian for Persian audience, but after a long period living in Europe, now 42 years, Europe became their life, even if they continue writing in Persian. So the subjects of the tax office and the immigration and all these things happen, and the rising of right wings became part of their literature. So there is a space began to be built between them and their readers who read their literature in Iran, because the subject became different. Yeah. And here, they began to be translated. And here the things became tricky. When you are translated into language you didn't write in, and at the same time you live in that country where you are translated. So let's take example, a Syrian writer who lives in Germany and now he's translated into German. It's different than a Syrian writer who translated into Germany, but he lives in Syria. because in that case, you began to have new audience. And then you began to describe in your literature the cliches that everyone knows as Arab, because your audience became not the same audience like before. For example, if I say the Palestinian question in my text, my readers, they know what I mean, the Palestinian question. But if I say the Palestinian question and inside me, I'm writing for a new audience who will read me later on in the translation, I should add more things to it, especially for a country not friendly for the Palestinian question like Germany. You understand?
So I want to add something.
We began to notice some keywords that this text is not written actually for Arabic audience, even if it's written in Arabic. And it didn't need to be clever to notice this. And there's a lot of this text right now.
Can I add something, Caroline, to this, actually? Yeah. Because it happened with me very recently. When I was at Academy Schloss Solitude, I performed my solo, Baba Come to Me. And it's also part of memoir, personal memoir, but it also includes, as you said, Ghayath, all of these terms that I shouldn't focus on while presenting to an Arabic audience. I wrote it first in the Arab world. I was in Cairo. I performed it in Beirut, in Tunisia. It was received in a different way. And then when I started performing it in Europe, I noticed how it's worth performing everywhere, but it's always, I had this fear. It's unfortunately, you fall under this fear. I had this fear of people not understanding a thing. And that and then it was confirmed by some friends who are bilingual who said like, yeah, you know, I understood it, but maybe they didn't get what you mean by when we returned. You should say, I don't know, Oslo. When you say something, you should say something. And then I was, the last performance I did in Schloss, I kept refusing changing the text. It's just annoying for me. So I decided to leave a note on the chairs with one paragraph summarizing the period I'm speaking about, because I couldn't get out of this issue, but I will never read it on stage. I will not break my text if someone doesn't know my history and I have to know theirs.
I agree with you.
So I had to be like this, like in 1982, some ships shipped Palestinian fighters out of Lebanon,
And let the translator work little and make some hard job.
Yeah, and it worked. So there are, I mean, there are circumventions, but we have always to think of them, unfortunately. Like it's not, you are not the same writer anymore. You have to think much more.
And Farah, this is a very interesting point about the creative ways one could encounter that, or one could work around it. And speaking of your performance, and by the way, we should later send the participants, for those who are Arabic speaking, the article that Ghayath was talking about, but also a link maybe to your performance. And Farah has actually brought a poem with her today that she has written just recently, just a few months ago. And it touches on this experience of having arrived in a new place. Farah, it would be lovely if you could read it to us. Farah is going to read it first in Arabic and then in English. Oh, and one thing is, Farah actually translated it yesterday for the workshop.
Yeah, thanks to Catherine Halls. She helped she saved me, but it's also a draft in progress. So I just wanted to show up with something today. So let's see. كلبة ضالة. ككلبة ضالة أجوب شوارع المدينة. لا بيت لي. حين تزرق السماء تحبني، وتسكنني الأرض حين أراقب الغيوم. أصابع خفية تمسد على وبر المبلل من صقيع الصمت. أنظر للعابرين وهم ينظرون إلي، ينثرون الفتاة أمامي، لكن بقايا الأطعمة جميعها لا تشبعني. لا نباح لي ولا اسم ولا عنوان يطوق رقبتي. أمشي وأمشي، أعاود الدوران في نفس الشوارع، علي أحنطني عليها أو أحنطها بداخلي. أقلد الأصوات حولي لأشبهها. ضحكات طفلة تجرب المشي، حديث صباحي بين جارتين تشكوان جارتهما الثالثة، ارتشاف القهوة بين شفتي عجوز شارد اتخذ من مقعد على الرصيف مقهاه المفضل، قضم عجلات الدراجة لأوراق الخريف، وتسلل الساعي من الأبواب إلى صناديق البريد. أقلد الأصوات علها تصير عائلتي، وأصير أنا برغم ضلالي ابنتها المفضلة. ككلبة ضالة تنز جروحي كل ليلة بعد مشي طويل، ويبتل وبري مهما نشفته الشمس، فألعقني بحكمة الناجيات، وأكتب شعراً لأجل ندوبي قبل أن يأتي الصباح. Now I'll read in English. Stray woman dog. Like a stray woman dog, I roam the city streets. I have no home. When the sky is blue, she loves me, and the ground makes its home in me as I watch the clouds above. Fingers kneading fur damp with silence frost. I watch passers-by as they look at me, scatter crumbs, but all these leftovers do not satisfy. I have no bark, no name, address, no collar. I walk and walk in circles, the same streets, mummifying myself in them, perhaps, or them inside of me. I imitate the voices to sound like them. A girl child learning to walk. Morning conversation, two neighbors complaining about a third. Coffee on the lips of an old man, homeless. A seat on the pavement, his favorite cafe. Bike wheels, eating autumn leaves. Postman slipping from door to mailbox. I imitate the voices, maybe they could be my family, and I could be, though I'm lost, the daughter they love best. Like a stray woman dog, wounds bleed at night from walking so long, fair wet even in the sun. I lick myself with survivor's wisdom, write poetry for my scars before the morning comes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, dear Farah. That was beautiful to hear. Ghayath, you've heard now this poem, and or first, Farah, also, if you want to tell us something about the context in which it was written. I was going to ask Ghayath now, and by the way, everyone, I've seen all the comments and the questions, we'll get to them, I promise you. So this poem describes a certain state. One could say a certain feeling of homelessness, a certain feeling that one might get in a new place, starting all over again, leaving something behind. Would you say that this is a classical experience of an artist in exile, or would you say this can also describe just a general sense of loss? And if that is so, how can nonprofits that are interested in support and promotion of artists in exile, how can they do a better job of being true allies? I don't know who of you would like to speak first. Maybe Farah, because you just read. Yeah, if you want.
Yeah, I mean, I have the best ally so far. WIR MACHEN and MRI. I mean, my experience has been good, but also I think because because of you and because the composition of this institution. So I think definitely this mixture that the organization has, joining different generations, like people from Deutschland and people who were exiled on different times, creates this blend that knows how to receive newcomers, and I feel pampered, to be honest. Yeah, I was walking. I think it's a human experience, but that's the tool of art in the end. Like someone could translate it differently, but I could only translate it this way. I just wrote a poem about it. When you move, I was like contemplating this, how do I ground myself and how do I learn my neighborhood and how do I have a visual memory. So apparently the way I train myself when I move into a new place is that I keep walking the same way until it's very well known, and then I switch to a new direction. So when I found myself in my new place, and every day I forced myself to take a walk so that I don't get depressed, and then I kept circling the same neighborhood and noticing new things every time. Noticing a new shop here, a new Spielplatz here, noticing kids in the street. I was in a very, very vibrant street. I was very lucky, to be honest. So I was noticing this old man. I walked every day to take the U-Bahn to the Deutsch class, and there is this man really sitting on the bench at 7 a.m. with a cup of coffee that is from his home. It's not a pickup coffee. So he brought his thermos and his coffee, and he sits in that bench specifically every day. So I felt those are my new friends, and I have to mummify these streets and this moment. And I was discussing with Dima, the first moment in a new place is always missed if you don't document it immediately. And that was part of this writing. Like I have to write about that in the feeling of it, not 5 years after, because I have to remember how I was doing then. And yeah, but moving that to talking about institutions, I think really this need to deal with artists as humans too, who need to ground and who need time to become home again or semi-home or whatever. And I have no experience till now but with you, and so far I felt welcome in that sense. I was appreciated as a human being. Like I am worthy of care and of support, regardless of the production and the quickness of the PR attitude that sometimes some NGOs fall into, that they want a label and they want to brag about what they achieve. And I didn't feel this. So I felt I am taking a bit of time to feel my surroundings and to feel human in my place. And this is, I think, better allyship than just also high expectations from artists, because artists, I think, weren't supposed to be intensely producing until this whole world of funding and started, and you have to catch the deadline and but it should spring also from inside when it's ready to come out. And yeah.
Okay. We have some questions in the chat and also some comments. Perhaps we'll take one of them right now, but then also we would like to listen to Ghayath reading a part of his poem, I Can't Attend. One of the comments is from Sarnt Utamochete. Are you here? Sarnt. I don't see you anymore.
I am here.
Are you there? Yeah, you're there. Would you like to elaborate on your comment?
I mean, it's just I wrote it already. So I mean, I think it's basically this sort of split between artists and institution, curator that surround the artist that create this label, you know. So I mean, for most of the time, also a lot of artists internalize this institutional frame and explain too much. But in the end, it's really much a product of the frame that works around the artist. So I just have a feeling like sometimes we need to forgive ourselves a little bit, like not to be too harsh on ourselves because we criticize ourselves too much. But just my thought. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Okay, Ghayath, let's go back to something that you said at the very beginning. You said that we have certain cultural images of artists in exile. We sometimes connect great work of art with them. I mean, Hannah Arendt, Joseph Brodsky, Mahmoud Darwish, we admire them, we romanticize them, we look at them perhaps, or their work as some kind of moral compass. And perhaps by doing so, we put a lot of pressure on them. And this is at stark contrast from perhaps the reality that they live in. The person who is actually living it and who is supposed to provide all of this inspiration and moral compass to others has perhaps a completely different experience. And I found your poem, I Can't Attend, to be showing a very different image and perhaps also about a brutal side of things, about decisions that one cannot make, about feelings of inadequacy or frustration. And I think it would be lovely if you could read a bit from it, but also if you could afterwards tell us about the context that you wrote it in. Wait, you're here. You're muted still. Ghayath is going to read it in Arabic, and then Dima will read it afterwards in English.
Yeah, so this poem, I think, from 2012, and it's longer than what I will read. Only the part number 1 and then part number 6, and it's have the same title as my third book, I Cannot Attend, and I wrote it because in that year I discovered that I am chicken. I was afraid from death. Most of my friends, they went to Turkey and they smuggled to Syria and they took part in the Syrian revolution. But as I was afraid that I will die, like most of them did. So I wrote a poem describing why I cannot attend and trying to invent many reasons to not going there, but all of them like a lie. The reality that I was afraid from death. لا أستطيع الحضور في الشمال بالقرب من سياج الله مستمتعا بالتطور الحضاري وسحر التكنولوجيا وبآخر ما توصلت إليه البشرية من أساليب التمدن وتحت التأثير المخدر الذي يمنحه الأمان والتأمين الصحي والضمان الاجتماعي وحرية التعبير أتمدد تحت شمس الصيف كرجل أبيض وأفكر بالجنوب مختلقا أعذارا تبرر غيابي يمر بجانبي مهاجرون ورحالة ولاجئون يمر سكان أصليون ومزيفون ومتهربون من الضرائب كحوليون وأغنياء جدد وعنصريون كلهم يعبرون أمامي وأنا جالس في الشمال أفكر بالجنوب وأؤلف قصصا مزيفة كي أغطي على غيابي وكيف أنني لا أستطيع الحضور لا أستطيع الحضور فأنا الآن مشغول بالحرب الباردة التي أخوضها يوميا مع العزلة بالقصف العشوائي للعتم بالاكتئاب الممنهج وغارات الوحدة التي تستهدف المطبخ بحواجز التفتيش التي تقف بيني وبين الصيف، بالبيروقراطية بسبب فصل السلطات التشريعية والتنفيذية، بالروتين في دائرة الضريبة. لقد حدثتني طويلاً عن الحرب، دعني أحدثك قليلاً عن السلام الذي أنعم به هنا في الشمال. دعني أحدثك عن تدرجات لون البشرة، عن معنى ألا يعرف الناس أن يلفظوا اسمك، عن الشعر الأسود، عن الديمقراطية التي تقف دائما في صالح الأغنياء، عن التأمين الصحي الذي لا يشمل الأسنان لأنها ليست جزءا من الجسد. دعني أحدثك عن الخضار التي لا طعم لها، عن الورود التي لا رائحة لها، عن العنصرية المغلفة بابتسامة. دعني أخبرك عن الوجبات السريعة والقطارات السريعة والعلاقات السريعة، عن الإيقاع البطيء والحزن البطيء والموت البطيء.
I can't attend. Translation, Catherine Copen. In the north, close to God's boundary wall, enjoying a developed culture, the magic of technology, the latest achievements of human civilization, and under the influence of the drug that grants safety, health insurance, social security, and freedom of expression. I lie in the summer sun as if I am a white man and think of the South, contriving excuses to justify my absence. Immigrants, travelers, refugees go by me, genuine inhabitants, bogus inhabitants, tax dodgers, alcoholics, the new rich and racist, all of them crossing in front of me as I sit in the north, thinking of the South, composing superior stories in order to cover up my absence and explain how I can't attend. I can't attend as I'm currently busy with the Cold War I fight daily with isolation, with indiscriminate chilling by darkness, with systematic depression, with the attacks of loneliness that target the kitchen, the checkpoints that stand between me and summer, the bureaucracy caused by the separation of the legislative and executive powers, the routine procedures of the tax department. You have talked to me at length about the war. And now let me tell you a little about the peace that I enjoy here in the North. Let me tell you about the gradations of skin color, what it means when people don't know how to pronounce your name, about black hair, about democracy that always favors the rich, the health insurance that doesn't cover your teeth because they aren't part of the body. Let me talk to you about the tasteless vegetables, the flowers with no smell, the racism masked by a smile. Let me tell you about the fast food, fast trains, fast relationships, slow rhythms, slow grief, slow death.
Thank you, Dima, and thank you so much, Ghayath, for bringing this poem with you and reading it to us. Before we continue our discussion, there has been a question to Ghayath in the chat, and it's about a different work of yours, Ghayath. Noha, you've asked that question?
Yes.
If you'd like to talk about it, I'm trying to pull it up right now.
Okay, I was just saying that you said a writer shouldn't find himself having to explain himself or his intention. And that's a very good thought. I've watched your poetry film, Evian, and I liked it very much. But I was asking myself, about the function. I'm not saying you shouldn't have done it like this. I'm wondering, did you find yourself forced to use the image of the Holocaust and comparing the situation of Syrian refugees to the Jews from back then, because you felt that in order for the German public to feel this tragedy, they have to be reminded of a tragedy of their own? Like, wouldn't have they been able to sympathize without this having to explain in their own language, in their own memories?
Yeah, it's very, very important question, Noha.
And Ghayath, could you please tell everyone also something about the work at the beginning?
Yes, I do things, I call it poetry films. I do it together with a Swedish poet, Marie Silkeberg. We did 5 films and we wrote a book together. And it's we don't do it as a poetry filmmaker. We don't want to be filmmakers. We find a new way of publishing poetry. So we began to make poetry films. This year, she was busy with her new book, so I did the film Evian alone. Yeah, why I did this film? No, it's not at all about what you say, but it's a very important question. Why I choose the Holocaust minimum to put it in my subject at the conference Evian for 4 reasons. The first one, before I came to Berlin, I was in Amsterdam. Before I got the DAAD Künstlerprogramm, I was in Amsterdam, and my publisher, my Dutch publisher, contacted me, and he said there is a famous writer, her name Linda Polman. She asked you to be in her release. She have a new book and she want to be in your release. I say yes, but why? She says she quoted you in your book, and her book is called Nobody Know Them, Nobody Want Them. So I contacted her and she told me about the book, and Nobody Want Them. It's a line written in the Nazi newspaper that after Evian conference, to show that the Nazi tried to say that nobody want the Jewish refugee. And she told me about Evian conference, and that was a shock for me. In 1938, 32 European countries decided to meet in the city of Evian in France to discuss the refugee crisis. And I was shocked when she told me. I told her, what do you mean? Did they call it in that time refugee crisis like Syria now? She said yes. So then I understand that history repeats itself, exactly like Karl Marx said. And I told her, tell me more. And she told me 32 countries met it in July 1938. And none of these Western countries accept to have even one Jewish refugee. And then the Nazi newspaper wrote this line in a big mansion, and I think that Adolf Hitler, he wrote it personally, nobody want them. And 4 months after that, the Kristall Night happened. So I understand that there's something similar. And then she began to give me the documents she had from the newspaper of the Western world. And guess what? Listen what they say. They came here to steal our women. They will take our jobs. They have different value. They are dirty. The spy will come with them. And then I told about, like, this is exactly what they say about Syrian. She told me exactly. This is what I want to say in this book. So I began to read more and more about this conference. And I saw that there is 100%, they use the same words and the same thing. And even they call it refugee crisis, and even they make this conference, and nobody want to speak about it now, so they can only blame the Nazis of what happened, while it looked like the anti-Semitic was a very big ideology in Europe, and none of them accept unusual. So I decided to take it back alive, at least from my poem. So I wrote this poem, Evian, and then I make the film. That was the first reason. The second reason, that I am a Palestinian. And I born as a refugee in Damascus because of the Third Reich, because of the anti-Semitic. If the Europeans were not racist and anti-Semitic against the Jewish, they will not go to Palestine to survive, and I will lose my country. So I lost my country because of Berlin, where I live in. And because Berlin have many layers, and it's because of it is my favorite city, and I choose it. And I really love it, and I love the cities have many layers. So the question was not a choice. I try to avoid it. I don't want to be in the cliches. Oh, again, he's writing. No, it's not like that. I was forced with the shock that I should do something about this forgotten conference called Evian, where the United States of America, before the conference began, said we will not accept even one refugee. So it was really shocking for me. And because that, I make the film. So yes, it's a very important question, and we should ask ourselves if we got to remind that history repeat itself. I think yes, in a way, history could repeat itself, not in every way, but at least in some shapes. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much. I asked it in the first place because you are not the first Syrian writer who is using this comparison, and
no, but I didn't make compare. No. I try to avoid this. This is very sensitive question. I didn't make any compare. What I did is like this. I make cut from history. So we are looking to a boat of refugee drawing in the sea. Cut. And then I say, 1938 Evian conference, and you find yourself now in a conference where people discussing and that they will not accept any Jewish refugee. So no, I try to avoid the compare because that is the cliche. There's nothing compared between what happened with the Syrian and the long history of anti-Semitic began in Europe with Fernando and Isabel in Spain and ended with a final solution. No, that is not the tension. I'm speaking about the refugees from two countries in that time, 1938. Austria and Germany, who tried to survive. They were witnessing something. They don't know exactly what will happen, but they can feel that there's something going wrong, and they try to survive. And none of these Western countries accepted them. Even if they are rich, even if they are well-educated, it was a really foggy thing. And I think we should dig it more than, like, I didn't went to the question of the Holocaust itself, that it's written a lot about it in Europe. I went to the question of Evian conference, how the Western world behaved towards the Nazis, and how they say exactly what they say about the Syrian now. And the word refugee crisis, it was the second time used with the Syrian. The first time it was with the refugees from Austria and Germany.
Okay. Thank you, Ghayath. I think this answers Noha's question. And it is indeed very interesting how historical events seem sometimes to have similar patterns and recur. Farah, in the hope of moving to a slightly more positive topic, but also at the risk of sounding kind of naive, do you think that there could be a way of playing with the labels, of playing with the categories in a perhaps artistic way, in a creative way, and then owning them again, reclaiming them somehow? And while Farah answers this question, please, everyone, think about if you have anything to ask, if you would like to share something, because we only have 15 minutes left.
There is always hope, no? I mean, I think we are already playing with the labels. I mean, being here is playing with this label, and like taking space despite the label is playing with the label. So I think a lot of artists are doing so through their artwork, and the question is it getting through? Not that it's the duty of people. I think it's one way to handle this mode of exile, and to actually play with the label, and to make fun of it, and to I make fun in my I will reference once again the performance. Unfortunately there is no video of it because I'm still hoping to perform it in Berlin live, but maybe Patrick is trying to help me. Let me see later. But I play with the presence of Mahmoud Darwish in my childhood and in my life during the solo and then, for example, I was asked from one Iranian artist, she's a friend of mine, was a bit insulted that I was trying to mock Mahmoud Darwish and how he reads poetry inside of the performance. But it's I think that it's this expectation of even how you read your poetry and how you say a political statement and how Palestinians, then for sure, as Ghayath said, especially Palestinian poets especially have to be categorized as political, or otherwise why write poetry? Because poetry has been connected very tightly to the cause or the Palestinian question. So this playing with it, not missing the Palestinian part, but also being so present in your work and not betray yourself for anyone, for the funder, for Palestine, for the expectation, is a very thin rope that I myself try to always balance on, but it's very exhausting. It's really exhausting. So there is hope as long as we try, but I think it's also how I think the playing with labels also could come from the sources of support, from the funders, from the festivals, from NGOs, from scholarship institutions, because this one-sided face they want to see from someone is not existent. It will never exist, and there should be expectation of like there is this experimental, many experimental white artists, because why not? There is like I don't want to always feel like I have to be the one who's conveying a message. I have to be always the one who's saying something so concrete to receive a funding, while I see a colleague who is just I don't know, taking random photos and saying I'm experimenting with this and that and done. That's it. So everyone should play, I think, with the labels. Yeah.
Thank you, Farah. Now I'm looking to the participants. Are there any raised hands or questions that are waiting? Are you all thinking about the many questions that you want to ask? We have 10 minutes left anyway, and we have, of course, more questions, but I just want you to also share, if you want to share your experience, if you want to make a comment. I know that this did not deliver exactly on the workshop format. It's been more of a panel discussion, I'm aware of that. But as you all know, it's just a bit difficult when we're not in the same room with each other. Okay, if there are no further Noha, yeah. Noha, you had one comment, right? And I think actually Annika or Dima would be the best to respond to that, but please tell us something yourself.
Well, it's a comment about labeling, that labels exclude, again, other people who maybe are facing the same challenges, but they don't fit 100% into this label. And my example is when you are not in exile, but you left your country because of some problems and difficulties, and then you are facing the same challenges that writers in exile are facing. And I was saying that cultural institutions, because you asked also how can cultural institutions help more? I think this is an additional boundary that is put on writers and creators of content here, that they need to fit into a label to be supported. And my comment was also about the criteria that a writer has to be accomplished first in their own country, has to have been published in order to earn the right to be supported here. I think this is a bit tricky because if someone was able to be accomplished in their own country, for example, a woman, I mean, then she wouldn't have been, I mean, you understand what I mean. It's not easy for someone to be accomplished in their homeland, and a sign of this is that they left. So yeah, this was my comment.
Yeah, I would love to answer to you, Noha, if I may. So let me start with your second comment. We know exactly that being published as a woman in Afghanistan, for example, is very difficult. So we don't take it very strongly in the way like being published means a book. So we have this kind of a network who's telling us, so there is this literary work and sometimes it's under the cover. It doesn't have to become public. And then this counts as having had a literary life before. So it's not a very categorical thing that we transport our criteria from here to there because it doesn't work. You're completely right. The second, the thing what you said at the beginning is a very, very inspiring insight, and it was a blind spot actually. I never thought about it. And I'm very thankful that you shared it with us, because now that you say it, it's completely obvious to me, but I really never thought about that this label of, or that people who has to leave their country without, in a narrow sense, political reasons, have the same problem and facing maybe even more challenges. Yeah, I can just say thank you, and we will think about it in our project, and I will mention it from now on in every discussion I have with other cultural institutions, because I never heard that before, that argument. And I talk with so many institutions day by day. Today I talked already with 2. So I will transport it, and I will transport it into our institution as well, and we will think about how to find. It's a question of how to network, how to identify, or how to put the offer of invitation in a way that people who fit in that category feel invited. So thank you, Noha.
Thank you for understanding.
Thank you, Noha, and thank you, Annika, for your response. I see that Sylvia has a raised hand.
Yes, thank you very much for all your input and sharing your experiences and your views on that. This issue was precisely one of the issues we wanted to discuss in this festival, because we have the feeling with our fellow curators that there is the need to reflect on the practice of all these well-meaning institutions that we are. So we need to be self-reflective on our practices, because we produce and reproduce problems if we don't ask for this critique and this reflection. The issue of labeling extends to a lot of artistic practices and to also life choices, and has to be reclaimed again and again. And I came to learn that in the field of visual arts, there is more, because I've been working in interdisciplinary fields for a long time. In the field of visual arts, there is much more awareness and consciousness about the need not to fix people to national origins, to avoid this issue of explaining an artist as Egyptian for all of his life. And this was the result of claims, of discussions, of people saying, I'm not going to accept to be labeled like you want me. So this is something that curators have to be accountable for, because it's part of good institutional practice to negotiate how somebody wants to be defined or not. And that's why I'm very thankful also for the other inputs. Still, because this is a field that needs to be renegotiated again and again, because we're working in the field of arts, and that's the possibility of the arts to renegotiate the space of visibility. And yeah, from my side, thank you very much for your input.
Thank you, Sylvia. Farah, do you have a raised hand? Okay.
I just wanted to add to this very quickly. Honestly, I really believe in that. I don't like the word integration, so let's ignore the word integration, but take the higher meaning out of it.
We don't like it neither, Farah.
Yeah.
No one likes it.
Yes, I think to also overcome part of the issues is to really co-work with those artists to develop the policies, and to also consult those trusted ones who've lived similar experiences in devising solutions, because and that's why I like my experience with WIR MACHEN, and I respect it so much, how this composition is built, because to pick, I don't agree with Ghayath that if you are not published first in your country or in your own language, some people in Egypt, for example, I know, write first and foremost in English. They have.
I didn't say you must.
Yeah. I mean, I understand your point, but at the same time, I do think that, yeah, some opportunities were stripped of some people and back home, either because of gender or gender identity or sexual orientation or many other reasons. However, I do agree there is bad quality sometimes, and there is no way to tell, because sometimes the editor is even not a native speaker. So they take the superficial.
But I didn't. I think you should publish in Europe, but in Arabic. My publisher is Milan.
Wait on me, please. I'm not replying to your opinion. I'm saying something else completely, but I used part of it. My point is that, yeah, when there is an Arabic co-editor, if there are Arabic writers or Afghani or Iranian or this helps also seeing through the quality of the text and the experience, and not only getting stuck with like a woman from Palestine lived in so many cities, then definitely she will she will be a good writer. And of course, translation, sometimes the translated text is much more beautiful than the original if the translator is a good writer, not only a good translator. So I think from that point of view, it is very important to have someone who speaks the language very well, not only speaks the language, and have a bit of artistic process or practice also of themselves, to know how also to evaluate together, instead of just reading through 20 pages of applications and not getting a single sense of the type of art that's taking place. So that's one idea to add to the table, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Farah. Ghayath, you'll respond right away. And I know from the Polysphere team that we can extend 5 more minutes if we want. And I think this is something that you said at the beginning, Farah. We need to address the policies. We need to address the funding schemes. How are the narratives of the funders? And I think this is such a good festival because it also brings policymakers and knowledge production, so universities. And I think this is the interdisciplinarity that is needed for a change. Now, Ghayath.
Yeah, I didn't say that the writer should be published in his country, not at all. Most of our country is dictatorship. He should be published in his own language. My publisher is in Milan. I publish in Europe in Arabic. To be a writer and you write in Arabic, your audience should begin to understand if you are a good writer to translate you or not. You should at least begin to be a writer first. So publish in your language. Let us read you, and then we will see if you are the person who really need and have the value to be translated and paid a lot of money for translator and publisher house and like this, and then be translated. I didn't say that you will be published in, and this is not always, I didn't say must, I say you should. But must, there's no must, right? As you want. If you are a good writer, nobody can deny that. If all the world is against you and you are a good writer, you will appear as a good writer. But if you are a mediocre and you are not published in your own language and only published by NGOs for people who like the cliches, and you say exactly the cliches they like you to hear, they want to hear, then let me please say there is a problem. And I know hundreds of these people surrounding me in Europe. I don't want to mention names. I am able to mention names, but I don't want. So what I say, to be a writer, it's right for everyone in any language. But what happened after this Syrian revolution, for example, and Syrian writers? We began to find writers. One of them in Sweden, she said they refused to publish me in the Arabic country. And I told her, but because I am responsible in the publisher house. And I told her, where did you send your book? She was saying the audience that the people didn't publish her in the Arabic country. She lied, and she is published in Swedish. So there is blaming on this. So it's really not the best.
Okay.
I don't like it too much.
Okay, let's not get into that. Also, it's not the purpose of the workshop.
Let's go into that. Actually, why not? Let's go.
It's Ghayath, you're muted. Wait, Ghayath, look, it's just not the
I say why the conference is about this. Let's go to this.
So look, I think the workshop is more about, it's not so much about shaming potential writers who are not good enough, who perhaps should not be published in a different language. Wait, just let me finish. As much as it is about changing the dynamics of those who are in power. But I totally understand your point that sometimes this will meaningless without competence and without knowledge of the specific language can lead to disasters and perhaps even an inflation of an art or literature of a certain language. When mediocre writers are published so much, I understand that.
Thank you so much.
Sylvia, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I would just like to add that the literary circuit in Europe is multi-layered and complex. So there are a lot of actors, and in the end, the market, the readership starts to choose. But a lot of poets publishing in Europe start by being published in contexts where there are subsidies. This is the way writers start. This does not happen in other countries. I come from Argentina, so some of you know, where there is not such a system of grants for newcomers, for new writers. Don't take the issue of migration. So mostly all of the poets and novelists you can read in German have started publishing in some context that is subsidized and not decided by a publishing house. And I absolutely understand your point about professional exiles They have always existed. There were people working as Cuban or Chilean exiles in the last century. So this is something one has to be aware of. But the mere fact of getting subsidies for publishing is also due to the privileged conditions of a very multi-layered literary circuit, where at the end, the issue is, do you create a readership? And I think for the time being, with social media, with networks, with all kinds of actors interested in creating readership, we should come to the point of quality finding its readers.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I think it is just so obvious how much we need to continue discussing about this. I think the conclusion is there is no easy conclusion, and we need to follow up on this and reflect more together as cultural practitioners, as artists, as whoever who's interested in this and wants to share their experiences. So I think this is a good moment to end. I'm not sure if we're all going to stay in the lobby afterwards, or
whoever wants to stay to just network and find out. The overtime, maximum overtime is 10 minutes to, well, it's almost 10 minutes longer. And as a host, as a curator of the festival, I would warmly invite you to take part of the other workshops and the events. There is plenty to see and to read and to learn about. I'm very happy to meet you in another round, and I'm very sorry we can't meet in person. We will hopefully do that in another context.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.